situation without AIDS is when you're heading towards being ill, but you're not ill.
I always assumed that if you had AIDS, as opposed to being just HIV positive, that you were very sick, that you had pneumonia or KS or chronic diarrhea or something. That changed for me when I myself was diagnosed with AIDS. And I was diagnosed not because of an illness, not because I was sick or that my immune system didn't seem to be working, but because my CD4 count had dropped below 200, which according to the CDC definition is what defines AIDS, an HIV positive test and a CD4 count of less than 200.
In 1993, in this country, we adopted a definition that caused the number of AIDS cases to double overnight. And part of that reason was, for the first time, we began counting people as AIDS victims who were not ill and who did not have any symptoms. They had a low T-cell count. And that's only one low T-cell count. And T-cells are something that can fluctuate 100% in a given day. So based on a low T-cell count, that year, the number of AIDS cases doubled overnight, and with that definition, there have been 182,000 Americans who are not ill, diagnosed with AIDS, who would not have AIDS if they moved to Canada, because in Canada, they don't recognize that T-cell definition as a criteria for having an AIDS diagnosis.
Most people consider it blasphemous when you point out that AIDS is not a disease. It's a syndrome. It's a collection of diseases. And those diseases get called AIDS if they occur in a patient that the doctor somehow concludes is HIV positive.
All of the diseases in the category called AIDS occur to people who are HIV negative. None of them are exclusive to people who test HIV positive, and all of them have causes and treatments that are known, well known, they're completely unrelated to HIV. So any of these diseases, when they happen to somebody who tests HIV negative, are called by their old name, but when they occur in someone who tests HIV positive, then they're called AIDS.
All kinds of diseases started coming into the AIDS family faster than anyone should have been comfortable with, really. To go from 2 or 3 to go to 30 in a few years was like somebody should have said, hey, there's something wrong here, and it's got to be financial. Things don't happen that fast in science. You don't suddenly notice that one new organism is causing every problem. I mean, it was a bizarre thing that happened. It really was. It didn't really have any precedence in terms of medicine before that, unless perhaps you could think of the possession by the devil stuff, right? You see, once you're possessed by the devil, anything that happens to you or anything you do is got to do with that, right? So it makes it easier for you to get tuberculosis, and it makes it easier for you to get uterine cancer. It makes it easier for you to get Candida albicans. And so all those things can now be called AIDS. Now, why would anybody do that? And why would any reasonable doctor start lumping together various symptoms into one pile and think all this is caused by HIV?
We have a test, but it's not a test for AIDS, and it's called an HIV test, but it's not a test for HIV, and we have a series of problems that we are calling AIDS, but that doesn't elevate AIDS into a disease. I don't know if you read magazines lately, there's a lot of ads for pharmaceutical drugs lately. These pharmaceutical companies are marketing more and more direct to consumers and encouraging you to ask your doctor for the remedy of the day. And I noticed that there's a lot of these syndromes popping up, like social anxiety disorder or SAD. I mean, you can make a syndrome out of anything you want, basically, and then find medicines to sell to make people better from it. And AIDS is not that, ludicrously simple, but it is, in a sense, just as constructed. It's a construct. It's a category of other problems, some of which were occurring in greater numbers in a very small subset of people here in the U.S. and other parts of the world, that became, due to the social political climate with regard to sex, death, homosexuality, and drug use, it became elevated into this medical phenomenon that has become untouchable and sacred almost.
very first AIDS cases were 5 gay men diagnosed in Los Angeles in 1981 by a doctor named Michael Gottlieb. And what linked them was that they were all in what was called the fast lane gay lifestyle. They were doing a lot of recreational drugs. They were taking many different drugs at the same time, combining drugs much more than was the pattern for straight drug users. They also partied a lot. They went to bars, they went to clubs, they went to bathhouses. They met a lot of men. They had a lot of anonymous sexual contacts. And as a result, they were exposed to a lot of the classic sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis and gonorrhea. And because they were getting those diseases, they were also frequently going to doctors and getting antibiotic prescriptions to treat those. All of that created a situation where a handful of gay men were burning the candle at both ends and putting a blowtorch to the middle. And it's no wonder that after a while their immune systems started to collapse and they started getting sick in these unusual ways that previously had only been seen in older people whose immune systems had deteriorated from age.
I would watch my friends stay up all night at the baths doing speed and then take a downer, and then in the middle of the day in the afternoon they'd be under the covers twitching. I consciously tried to deal with drugs in a saner way than most of my friends did.
There was a ton of poppers. They were everywhere. You would walk into a gay bar, and on the dance floor, it was not unusual to see every probably third person holding a little bottle up to their nose, and you could just smell it everywhere.
Poppers is a slang term for amyl and butyl nitrite inhalants. Their legitimate medical function is as an emergency heart disease treatment, to give someone to dilate their blood vessels so they don't have a heart attack. What they were used for in the gay community is both the physiological effect of dilating the rectum so that receiving anal sex is easier and less painful, and also there was a tremendous psychological high about them. John Reschy, in his book The Sexual Outlaw, describes the effect of poppers in a crowded environment as the room exploded in sex. They became a mainstay of the gay social scene in the late 1970s, were commonly used by large numbers of people in gay clubs and in the bathhouses. And their risk is that they're actually chemically quite similar to drugs given when doctors want to suppress the immune system, i.e. to transplant patients. The chemistry is rather similar, so it's not at all surprising that people who took these drugs quite often would develop immune suppression.
So the drugs became something that you did together with a group of friends before going out. It became part of the way that our social lives were starting to be structured.
It was a blast. I remember living in Miami and flying to New York for parties at the Saint, and going. This was a club that was really set up for gay men, and you would arrive and the music would just be pulsating, and you'd go up in the balcony and just have all sorts of wild anonymous sex, and this is before rubbers and that sort of thing, and we'd formed this little subculture of where sex was, we took it on as like a recreation.
I was treated for gonorrhea, I bet 5 times, chlamydia maybe twice, syphilis once, anal warts, let's see, what else? Crabs, like you wouldn't believe. Those bathhouses had crabs.
Well, think about it. With gay men, the problem is even worse than with heterosexuals because of anal sex.